Superversive Livestream. I'm your host, Benjamin Wheeler, here with my co host, Anthony Marquetta, and the lovely, the illuminating El Jagi Lamplighter Wright, who is the teacher for the soon to be famed creative writing course.
It's called The Art and Craft of Writing. It's the name of the course.
It will be famed and no one will ever forget it again. Uh, I'm actually back from a strongman competition. I'm feeling the warm glow of the sun, and superpowers will be coming soon, I'm sure. But how are you doing today, Jaji?
I'm doing very well, thank you. We are settling in with having our sons home, and things are going well here.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
So tell us a bit about your creative writing course.
Okay, so um, this course, I'm just going to kind of tell it historically. Once upon a time, when I was learning to write, I would figure out a principle about writing that I didn't want to forget, and I would write it down on a little sheet called writing tips. And occasionally I would share these writing tips with other writers, and I was kind of surprised to find out they really liked them, like they were useful to someone other than just me. So in 2008, 2009, somewhere around there, I ran for 2 or 3 years a weekly blog called Wright's Writing Corner. And because I had to write something every week, some weeks we had guests like John would write something, or Sarah Hoyt or somebody would write something for me. But sorry, something popped up on my computer. I've never seen before. I don't normally use this computer. So I started writing an article about each of my writing tips. So, after a while, for each writing tip, I had a whole couple of pages I'd written about it. And then when I started editing, I began to notice that after a while that I was giving all my writers the same advice. I was writing out the same particular points over and over again about what was needed to go from a story they wrote, which was a good idea, but not necessarily reaching the reader, to something that would pull in the reader. And so I wrote a couple articles about that. And then we came up with Superversive, we came up with the idea of putting it out as a class with videos. So I ran some test class. First, originally I tried it on the guinea pigs of my two sons in April. April,
Hmm.
And eventually, then we came up with the idea of doing it as videos. So we did a crowdfunder with Superversive, was going to be publishing these videos. And Ben Zwicky did the
Is everything all right?
We lost you. Oh no.
we produced these videos in according with what we said for the crowdfunder. We filled out all the things that were needed, but since then they've had a difficult life because Superversive closed, and Silver Empire said they'd take them for their author. They had a section for supporting authors that wasn't books.
Mm.
When the lockdown hit, that collapsed. And so they gave up on that idea. They had been making most of their money from the author services. But people stopped being willing to pay for them during the lockdown, so that collapsed. And then the whole Silver Empire collapsed. I had also been talking to Dave Farland, whose real name was Dave Wolverton, because he had a writer's workshop business. He already was distributing videos. He had a slight interest in possibly picking up mine. And unfortunately, he died tragically this winter.
No.
He fell down the stairs. So his death was a bit like David Hartwell's. And both of them were very good men who I admired, and I'm sorry to have them gone.
Hmm.
But the result is that I now have these writing videos, and no one to give them to. I have a agent, and he's been kind of shopping around looking for something, but hasn't found anything yet. So the videos are available, and I've been toying with the idea of just trying to sell them myself. I also teach writing classes. I teach two different types of classes, though not at the same time. One is a writing class based on the same. There's a book and videos, and then I have classes that I teach the same class with the same exercises, but I help to explain it and get the writers to understand it.
Hmm.
But I also teach at the moment. What I'm teaching is novel writers class. The novel writers class was requested. I do it because someone asked for it. And what it is a class where all I'm doing is I have a group of writers. I set them up in a circle so that each one's reading the stuff of the guy before him. So that you're not, the guy who's reading your stuff isn't the same guy who you're reading his stuff.
Hmm.
And then I read their stuff when they've had a chance to review it. And the whole point of it is just to encourage a writer to write. Like somebody just asked me if I would do it. She said, I really want to write a novel, but I need encouragement. And I said, yeah, this sounds like fun. So it's really interesting. I think in the future that I will try to have slightly less, like 12 or 14 people this time. It's slightly too many people for me to comfortably read and comment and feel like I'm doing a good job and not miss out on other things I'm doing. I think 8 to 10 would probably be a better size. But, people seem to enjoy it and be getting something out of it. And, so that's kind of what is involved in it. Gentlemen, I'm going to step away for just a second because it smells like smoke. I just want to make sure that nothing is burning. I'll be right back.
No problem. Anthony,
So I can say, oh, go ahead, Ben.
I was about to say, I think you're doing the novel writing course right now, aren't you?
Yes, that is actually what I was going to mention. I'm in the middle of the novel writing course. I also have seen the original art and craft of writing videos, which are fantastic, by the way. Like, seriously, great advice that you would not find anywhere else. And I am also, by the way, working with Ben's wiki. Ben is working with me on the novel that I'm working on for Jagi's novel writing course.
Which
And Ben is
quite
incredibly talented.
cool.
I believe he designed the videos, and you could tell because they're extremely high quality. And they are narrated by our good friend Ken, the Pinkerton's ghostwriter.
Mm-hmm.
And
Does that make
narration
a writer
is also excellent.
Pinkerton's ghost or a ghostwriter for Pinkertons? Sorry.
We discriminate against the undead and whatnot. No sorcerer or undead or resurrected being who is outside the Christian faith may work for us. No vampires need apply. No Irish either, but we let in Italian, so who knows?
One of the neat things about doing these classes is you get these little bits of people's stories. And the novel writers class, I get to read them in order, which is normally they send me like something from page 57, here's where I wrote about character. So it's actually kind of fun to read them in order. And they're all pretty enjoyable. I've been really lucky. Nobody's, because I don't know some of these people ahead of time. I have no idea what they're going to write. But I look forward to most of the like, oh, what's going to happen next, So which means that they're doing their job. And Anthony's reminds me of some of the books I really loved when I was a kid. So I've been enjoying that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, the reason that I wanted to do the novel writing course is because, like, for all of the writing that I do, and I do quite a bit now with Pinkerton Ghosts, I've probably written, like, the equivalent of a novel at this point with them.
You have.
A novel. Yeah. Like I have a narrative novel, which doesn't sound right, but is actually true. Like
Yeah.
I've done God Robot, and God Robot does have a narrative,
Yeah.
but it's a series of short stories. It's not like like the original I Robot. That was the idea behind God Robot. So it was not a novel. At least not, maybe I guess it could be considered a novel, but I didn't write, I didn't write a novel's worth of words. Same with Tales from the Once and Future King. Even though I did write quite a bit, it was at best novella length. I want to say the number of words that I wrote for that, with the help of my sister, who is also an extremely talented writer, uh,
Mm-hmm.
probably something like 20,000 words. Yeah, maybe. And I'm estimating. I don't even remember off the top of my head. I have
Yeah,
never.
I'm trying to remember it, and I don't have like a word count image in my head of how much was like the short stories versus the in between parts. So
Yeah, the main story of Tales was very extensive. That was like the whole point. After that was like one of the criticisms of God Robot that I had gotten. That was fairly consistent, which got great reviews, by the way, and like a decent amount of reviews too, especially for an anthology. I'm proud of how God Robot did, and I'm thankful to Vox Day for giving it a shot.
I
But
love the concept,
so
and I
well,
think
the concept
it's
was
cool.
John. So
But it was a neat idea, and I
the
liked what
concept,
you did.
yeah, the concept was John C. Wright. It was John. Uh, like he came up with the original idea. I got it from him, like straight up. I even asked him if I could use it.
I didn't actually mean that concept though. That was also cool. I meant the way you did the story that tied the stories together.
Oh, well, thank you. It was fun, but besides that, what I'm trying to get at is I had never actually sat and written a full novel. So I saw you were doing a specific novel writing class where you wrote the novel for the class, and I said, "Oh, that might actually be good to motivate make
Yeah,
me
and that's
and make
why
me work on this."
I did it. It was because one of the other writers had asked for that. And it is neat to see like one or two of the writers don't really there's one who just kind of writes scenes, but a lot of people are putting out actual chapters or parts of chapters. It's one or two of them are stories that like over the last 4 or 5 years that I've done these classes, I've seen like one of them's rewriting a book she started before and she never finished it. It's in a new form, but I can see some of the characters and it's a lot better now I think than it was before, like or it's a lot more developed, or maybe it's because I'm reading it in order rather than just a piece here and there. But it's just kind of my job is to encourage the writer, and their job is to write and to kind of both encourage but also learn from like I like the class I took where we had to critique each other's stuff. And the reason I set it up that way is I think you learn from the process of just reading someone else's stuff and thinking, what is it that's making me like it or not like it? And I find that that's useful for me in my writing.
Oh,
That's why
100%.
I
Mm-hmm.
set it up that way. So, also it's nice to get.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I
what do
found
you
the novel writing class to be helpful and for motivation purposes. Mostly, it's motivating you when you get that sick feeling in the pit of your stomach where you go, "Man, I haven't written anything," and it's Monday.
Yes,
So
exactly.
you go like, "I
It's
got,
exactly what it's supposed to do.
yeah,
So it's a neat
I
thing.
better get something done."
It's a neat thing. I like doing it. As I say, I feel I'm running behind because there's slightly more pieces to read than I had last time, and I feel a little bad about that. But other than that, I have been getting everybody. I got it back to everyone every week except the week I went to Georgia. A couple of them were late. But I had originally said I was going to skip the week of the wedding, and then I didn't end up skipping it. So I think that the two people who I was late on were very forgiving about the fact that I did them first the next week. So, anyway, it's fun, and I'm really glad to be able to do it. It's a neat concept, and some of the stories that are coming out of it are quite interesting. There was one that I read in the previous novel writing class I did in the fall. I read like 8, 10 chapters of this fantasy mystery, And when the author came back in the spring, he was writing a different book. And now, I was really enjoying it. I'm trying to get him to send me the rest of it so I can find out what happened. You know, it was a really like it was like the mystery part was well done, and it was in its own fantasy background. And he's kind of said he would, but he hasn't actually sent it yet. So I'm hoping eventually that I'll get to see where that one goes. But some of the others came back and they're still working on the same book, so that's easier for me because I can kind of follow along with how it's going.
Yeah, the novel that I'm working on, first off, I'm heavily inspired, and I don't know if you would be able to tell by this. You mentioned a few different things, specifically the Theseus novels. What was the name of the author?
Was it Mary Stewart?
Maybe. I know what you're referring to, though I haven't read them myself. I know exactly what you mean. Like, she had a series of, like, semi-historical...
Mary Renault. I think her name was Mary Renault. Mary Stewart wrote some...
Mary Renault, yeah. She had a series of, like, semi-historical novels, about Theseus.
Yeah.
So, I did not pick... Like, I didn't read those books myself. I did not pick...
Which is interesting, because there's a certain slight similarity of mood in between yours and theirs, which makes sense if they're all in the same general kind of background, but if you didn't read them, it means it's kind of organic, you know what I mean? Rather than you...
Well, the main inspiration for my story, well, first off, like, I've mentioned this on show before, so I'll mention in passing for people who might be new. I'm writing an adaptation of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, but the main inspiration of my story came from... First off, I was fascinated by Orpheus and Eurydice for years and years. Like, I had something in my head to do with it for a long time. But Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. Now, John wrote an article on Sci-Fi Wright, his blog, where he criticized Till We Have Faces. Even criticized is kind of... That's not exactly right. It's more like he explained why it was not one of his favorites, even though he recognized
it's not one of mine either, but I have a number of friends who utterly love it, so, I understand that.
I adore Till We Have Faces. It's one of my favorite books, but he wrote a Christianization. This is what I call... I don't know if Lewis ever used this word, but absolutely this is how I think of it. He wrote a Christianization of the myth of Cupid and Psyche. Not Christianization necessarily in terms of, like, theology or even mythology, but philosophy and morality.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
So it ends with, like, a Christian moral and a Christian message. And when I did this story, I read some of John's criticisms, and even though, like, I think that I wouldn't change Till We Have Faces. I think it's a great book. But with that said, some of John's criticisms did make sense to me. Some of it was like, you don't really get a sense of the setting until We Have Faces.
Yeah.
And this is true. You don't, because there is a particular reason for it. Now, this is why I think, and I would agree with John, like, it's perfectly fine to have preferences. So, Till We Have Faces is a story that is concerned with setting up a particular mood. And the mood is one of gloom and depression, right?
Yeah.
Like, at the start of the story, to contrast with some of the stuff you see later and all of that. But it does make the read rather grim, I guess is the way to put it.
Yeah.
Like, the palace is very gloomy that Orual, the main character, is living in. You don't get the flavor of classical Greece in it, because it doesn't even take place in Greece. It takes place in, like, a backwater kingdom south of Greece or something like that.
Yeah.
All of this stuff. And he explained that, so I made a concerted effort when I wrote mine. I wanted to get more of the flavor of Greece in it. And I don't think I did particularly... I didn't do a great job, because my descriptions are not that good. Because description is really, really difficult. I hate description.
I haven't thought you did a particularly bad job with that. I actually thought you were doing a nice job of... I mean, it, like, reminds me of freshman year at college, where we read, Socrates and Aristotle and Thucydides and Herodotus. I mean, I don't know. I don't think you're, I think I think you got the mood.
I appreciate that. Part of it, yeah, I was trying to give more of an impression because, to be fair, too, unlike with Lewis, where he had a particular reason for doing what he did, it does not hurt my story to give you the flavor of classical Greece. It
Right.
just, in theory anyway, it just increase, it would just make the story, come alive more. And I'm a fan of the musical Hadestown. We actually, Ben and I did a stream on
You
it.
if you'd seen it.
Oh, yeah. Ben and I did a stream on it. I'm a fan of it. I have a lot of complicated feelings about Hadestown because I think that there are things it does that are like so brilliant I'm jealous that I didn't come up with it, and things that they do that I think are kind of counterproductive. Like the one thing I think Hadestown does that is just genius, like so genius, it makes perfect sense. I cannot believe that they were the first people to come up with this, but as far as I know they are, or she is, Anais Mitchell. She connects the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice with the myth of Hades and Persephone. And
Oh,
she
yeah.
creates a thematic contrast with them. This is such a great idea that I'm actually kind of mad that she used it because I can't use it. It's very individual to Hadestown. The flip side is I think that when she gets into her, Anais Mitchell, who's the creator, gets into her political, her politics, it hurts the story a bit because what makes Hadestown work is that it's a very, and the Orpheus and Eurydice myth work, it's a very timeless story. That's what attracted me to it, actually. That ancient Greek myth, and it's like you could totally understand. And she's turning it into like this parable on communism almost. It's very, and there's some oddness there where it's like, or it's a line in Hadestown where he's like, and if we all just get along, then we'll always have enough. And I'm like, but that's not actually true.
Yeah, that's just
like,
weird.
Yeah, he goes, as long as we share, we'll all, and we could always raise our cups and there will always be enough. And that's portrayed as the only reason that things aren't going well is because Hades and Persephone's relationship is messing things up. But I'm like, that's just, that's false to facts.
Yeah, that's a little weird.
That's not how it works.
Yeah. I mean,
it's a little weird, but it's like...
You could have as a premise in your universe that if the gods not getting along is what made men not get along. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Have you read Souls in the Mist?
Souls of what?
Gene Wolfe's Soldier in the Mist.
I have not. I'm ashamed to admit I am not really a fan of Gene Wolfe. I have read The Sorcerer's House.
My favorite Gene Wolfe book, though the ones that followed were kind of weird. The premise is that there's a guy who every morning wakes up without his memory, and since he doesn't remember what happens, the gods come and talk to him. And it's just I was just saying because it's just an interesting kind of a... I think the first book does the ancient Greeks world, where I think he's actually a Persian soldier, but he's wandering around in Greece. Does it pretty well. After a while, it kind of... one of the later books, it just gets... I don't know, it got a little weird. I think maybe he didn't know where he was going with it. But the first book is good.
The most recent book I read that was set in this background, and that actually I took some major inspiration from, which I'll explain in a moment. The book Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I have. John,
awesome.
I haven't read it, but John read it. He
it's an awesome book.
When he was reading it, so I kind of feel like I know it's that, even though I haven't.
Yeah, it's the Battle of the 300 Spartans, right? And the main character, joins the Spartans. Yeah, he joins the Spartans as an outsider, and he hurt his hands, so he decides to become an archer, and he ends up becoming like the squire of one of the Spartan warriors, and it's just about, what happened and all that. It's a great book, but there's a moment in the story. So the premise of the story is that he is dragged from the battlefield after the Battle of Thermopylae, and the Persian surgeon saved him just long enough that he could tell his story. And he tells his story to the Persians because he believes that Apollo is compelling him to share the story of the 300 Spartans, right? And great premise. He dies by the end. Whatever. This is not a twist.
Yes.
Everybody dies at Thermopylae. So hopefully But
Yes.
anyway, he's telling the story, and at one point in the story, he pauses and stops and says, I think Apollo is compelling me to change, like what I tell you. Like, I'm going to go back to a different part of the story and start from here. And the Persians are like, okay, go ahead. And I really liked the effect of that moment, so I
That's
just
cool.
straight up stole wholesale
That is
for
cool.
the
No, I like
Orpheus
that,
novel.
and I think that kind of thing fits your story too, because you have those
Yeah.
influences.
The problem is, like, I was worried when I was writing it that it was actually too similar to Till We Have Faces, because Till We Have Faces, the conceit of the story is that Arul, who is the sister of Psyche, is telling the story, seeing how the gods treated her unjustly. And the conceit of my story is that Orpheus is writing this narrative to explain to people how the gods have treated him unjustly. It's the
That's like
same
a
conceit.
similar theme. Your story, because your story is a known Greek character in a Greek background whom many people feel may have been treated unjustly. It seems to me that it may be a similar theme, and maybe people who like one would like the other, but I don't think they're in any way too similar.
I mentioned this to Ben, and on the Superversive forum, I mentioned that this was concerning to me. And Ben's response was an interesting one. I highly doubt he remembers it.
I don't.
Because, this is something that would matter to me and not him. So, but Ben's response was, listen, like, the natural state of people when bad things happen, like, you need to be extremely advanced spiritually to not blame God or the gods.
Yep.
Like, for when troubles happen. Like, you need to be, I'm not saying you need to be Christian necessarily. I mean, you could be religious in some other sense, but you need to be very advanced in your spiritual life to recognize that when bad things happen, it isn't the God's fault.
I think there's a whole book on that called Job.
Yeah.
I
might have read it.
I mean, one of the points of Job is that everybody but Job blames God. No, I mean, I think you're only at the beginning, but it seems to me like it's a promising direction.
I know there is something to it for the Greeks where it's like, you have a man cursed by the gods like Odysseus, and people will literally go, look, dude, the juju that's on you, we don't want to touch, because if we help you, we'll get the juju too. The wrath of the gods. And so it's like there's a reasonable amount there. A man cursed by the gods should be left alone to deal with it because he probably did something to deserve it. But like,
which Odysseus did, by the way.
Yeah, he did deserve it, but it's I can't remember what he did though, unfortunately.
He blinds the Cyclops,
he blinds.
And he was the.
It's two. Yeah, there's two things that happen. One is he personally blinds the Cyclops, who is the son of Poseidon.
Right.
And the other is that his men eat slaughter the cattle of the sun that belonged to Apollo or Helios. I forget which one they belong to. And I believe he doesn't actually participate in that, so he lives, but he loses his crew.
Yeah, that's right. I remember Polyphemus. I didn't remember the sacred cattle.
Yeah.
But it's like there's a certain amount to that, even in our own literary condition. Even though it's not as, shall we say, personal as it is with all Greek gods at all times, there's still a certain amount of defying God. But usually that character is made the villain of some kind. I would say that like Steerpike from Gormenghast is a similar sort of thing, cursing all men and being cursed himself.
I was like 12 when I read that book. I don't remember it very well. I remember the character and I remember the mood of it, but I don't remember that many events.
Well, that's why you read it.
So I will say, one thing that I wanted to be careful about that Ben and I have discussed is that the modern ideas, like how modern people think, and I think a lot of this is actually particularly affected Jackson series versus the Greek idea of how they thought of their gods and their myths
Yeah.
are two very different things. Like I always call it like the Zeus is a jerk theory. Like we think of Zeus as a jerk. The ancient Greeks did not think of Zeus that way.
Right.
Like not at all. They would have been scandalized if you had said that.
Right. For one thing, a lot of the way Zeus behaved was the way normal Greeks behaved. And they just thought of Zeus as being like a I mean, he behaved the way a really powerful king was, and they weren't disapproving of their power. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I think that if you're looking at something like Percy Jackson, the gods in Percy Jackson are treated a little bit like the way supernatural fairy creatures are in urban fantasy, except without the noir part. Right. But the idea is they're basically everything's modern, the modern take on it. They don't really maintain any of the quality of their mythic or legendary nature, you know?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of the Percy Jackson series.
Oh, me too. I love them, but I'm just saying
it's just not accurate.
It's like urban fantasy. I mean, I there's some urban fantasy series I love, but I don't go to them when I want to read a fairy tale. I don't go to them for their fairy tale-ness, you know? I go to them because I like noir fantasies and it's I mean, like noir mystery stories, and it's fun to see it done with supernatural creatures. So I don't go to Percy Jackson
one particular
for the augustness of Greek gods, but I do like Greek gods in Percy Jackson because it's funny.
Yeah, like one particular aspect of it that we've discussed before is that people who talk about the myths nowadays will talk about Zeus raping women, and I think that is making a category error looking back at the past. Like, I don't think the Greeks would have really had a conception, generally speaking. I mean, always exceptions, because the Greek religion was what you would call orthopraxic, not orthodoxic, meaning as long as you did the rituals, it didn't really matter specifically what you believed, which meant that there was a fairly high variety of, like, you know, opinions about the gods. But generally speaking, I don't think the Greeks would have really like made sense of the idea of Zeus being a rapist because he is Zeus.
Yeah.
Like if the king of the gods wants to sleep with you, then then you're gonna do it. Well, and he has every right to do it.
Some idea because they had things like Daphne gets turned into a tree rather than be outraged by Apollo. You know what I mean? There was some, but there
in specific myths.
Girls off against
in
their
specific
will.
Myths.
But there were also plenty of merely seduction, and as you say, it was the king of the gods, so the girl just wasn't turning him down because I mean, king of the gods, you know. So I think you're. I certainly.
And it would have been like if you had turned him down, that would have been. It's the king of the gods.
Yeah, I think you're right that it just. You can't read the myths and really appreciate them if you're trying to judge them on a modern view. You know, I mean, it just takes away from most of what's good about them to try to hold them to some modern standard.
A lot of people call like the rape of Persephone.
But this is what makes Orpheus Eurydice.
A lot of people point out, like, you know, it's the rape of Persephone. Well, in actuality, you know, it was a lawful wedding from Zeus, her father, in some myths, to Hades, king of the underworld, who, by the way, I just read the Wine Thirst of Comus. John C. Wright's line is, like, where he goes, like, only Hades is satisfied with his realm, which disturbs the minor god talking to Comus. It's a fantastic line. But, you know, it's between Hades and Zeus, you know, with Persephone, you know, you know, I'm pretty sure that if Persephone wanted to
her father married her off and her mother didn't like it, you know. I mean, he does pick her up and carry her off and she's shown screaming, but she also becomes queen of the underworld, and I mean, it just. I'm not saying it's okay to rape people if they're going to be queen. I'm just saying their whole take on the thing was different.
Yes.
And while you can sit there and go, let's look at it from a modern view. We want to protect women. We're going to object to this. You miss a lot of the experience if that's what you're doing when you're reading the myths.
Yes.
Because they're not about real people. They're stories. We're not going out and saying you should do these things. But if you want to appreciate what the gods were like and what the people at the time saw them as like, you have to try to see as the people at the time saw them, not as we'd see them. So you're losing something if you're trying to.
There's some interesting.
Go ahead.
There's some interesting commentary even on her in this aspect. You will find certain, like, first off, I've always found, I've heard.
Kind of going in and out.
I experience this pain weekly.
People.
I'm of the opinion that it was a shock to Persephone.
What was that, Ben?
But she consented in the end. That it's like, oh, this was shocking, but I'm down with it. That's my opinion.
That's kind of what I got too. I mean, her mom tries to get her back, but my impression is that there seem to be myths where she's, at peace with being queen of the dead, and that, you could make an argument either way, I guess is what I'll say. I'm sure you could make the arguments that it was a bad thing and make a huge fuss about it. But I don't know that you have to do that. And I certainly don't think you want to do that if you're trying to write something that takes place at the time where the people are seeing things the way they would have seen them at the time.
Yes. There's I think a lot of things have been missed out. Like there's another on the opposite end of the sex spectrum is Ganymede, where people go, well, there's a pederastic relationship, and maybe in certain definitions of pederasty, but the idea that Zeus was a homosexual is, completely, so out of left field it doesn't make sense.
Well, I suspect what's going on there, though I could be wrong, is that there were certain parts of Greek life that seemed to encourage homosexuality and others that did not, and the myths may have been told by different, like, you can read really different versions of most of these myths that are built basically authentic.
Yep.
So there may be some that went into these things and others that just didn't,
Yep.
So, but yeah, I mean, it clearly he was like the world's #1 womanizer. So it's just.
Yep. And like cupbearer isn't like this weird like pseudo-sexual code. No, Ganymede held the cup for Zeus to drink from, poured the wine, all that stuff. Like sometimes a cupbearer is just a cupbearer. It's.
Yeah. Anyway, but so they had more than one level, and I think there's more than one writer writing things. So some of them made them one way, and some of them made them the other. Some of them made everything, and when we're writing them, we can do it any way we want, because it's not like we're looking at Attila the Hun and he actually did X, Y, and Z with these women. And if we make it better or worse, we're portraying it. So far as we know, there was never a Zeus who was actually carrying off these girls. So if we want to make him nice Zeus versus mean Zeus or whatever we want, I think it's fine to not get caught up in these, in the negative side of it, and make it a little more heroic or mythical. Particularly if you're talking about what the average person in like a kid, like Anthony's Orpheus is a kid in the past, so he wouldn't have been being told an adult version anyway. So.
Yep.
So my version of Orpheus in the story, I took upon it to tell, I guess, a different type of the myth. See portrayals of Orpheus and Eurydice, which, by the way, is one of the single most adapted myths. Like, literally the first opera ever written was an adaptation of Orpheus and Eurydice.
That's cool.
the first opera was an ad of Orpheus and Eurydice. The can dance comes from a
Oh,
parody
yes,
of Orpheus and Eurydice.
yes. That's the Orpheus thing. Yeah.
So, so in my version of the story, one thing that I wanted to do that was a little bit different. Normally, you see like Orpheus and Eurydice getting together in cosmic courtship, almost like two people who see each other and fall in love at first sight, and it's like divine intervention almost that they get together. And I did not want to do that. Like, I specifically wanted Orpheus and Eurydice to meet each other and fall in love. And there were specific reasons for this, thematic reasons that I will get to later in my story. That's very important that Orpheus and Eurydice feel like they know each other, on a deeper level, whether they do or not. So, but they need to believe that they do the same way that a modern lover might believe that they do. You know,
I think it's quite in
all
keeping.
of these things of that.
It's quite in keeping with.
What was that?
I think it's quite in keeping with things like either Till We Choose Faces or The King Must Die, The Bull from the Sea, the Mary Renault books. To take a myth and really add to it, draw it out, have them know each other much longer than you think they would, because the myths are almost like a sketch, and
Mm-hmm.
a novel, you expect it to delve
Sure.
deeper, to give you more of the background and more of the character and stuff. So I think that's quite in the tradition of taking a myth and turning it into a novel.
It is. One thing, too, in particular, is that, like, at the same time, this is not a lyrical retelling of Orpheus and Eurydice. I'm being very particular about it. This is the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, as you know it. In, like, what happens in the story is what happens, But that's the challenge of these sorts of stories, right? Because on one hand, I want to be very careful where it's like I'm not writing a subversion of Orpheus and Eurydice.
Right,
I'm trying to stay true to the original
right.
myth.
I
But
understand
on the
that.
other hand, yeah. On the other hand, though, everybody knows how Orpheus and Eurydice ends. And you mentioned this, I think, in your art and craft of writing, actually, that this was a particular challenge that you had at one point in your Prospero series,
Yeah,
where you go, there are two really obvious options. One of them is Eurydice stays in the underworld. The other is Orpheus succeeds and brings her out. But you're expecting both of them by that point of the
yeah.
story.
So coming up with something
So
different is a challenge.
different but inevitable.
Right.
And this was one of the reasons I was so excited about writing this, and that I've been very coy about talking about it on air, is that I'm very excited about the ending that I came up with. Like, I didn't actually start the work until I came up with the ending properly anyway.
I will
Like,
say, I will just say, without giving anything away, because you wouldn't want to do that ahead of time. I really like the ideas that you had, that you shared about where you were going with it.
yeah, conceptually it was something that I was very like I didn't want to start the story till I knew exactly where it ended. Like, a lot of this came from, we had a conversation with John about the Christianization of myths, and I talked about how his adaptation of the Antigone story, which is not a myth but a play, but is in a
Yeah,
similar
yeah,
mold. His adaptation of the Antigone story as The Cry of the Night Hound, even though he explicitly did not intend it that way, I consider it a Christianization of the Antigone story. Not a Christianization like theologically, because theologically, it has reincarnation. That's nonsense from
yeah,
a Christian
yeah.
perspective.
But you
But
mean the kind of the quality of the
right, morally, thematically, it is Christian. And I think what makes it Christian is that John recognized that there was something at the heart of the Antigone story, a quality to Antigone that, despite her many flaws that lead to her destruction in the original story, we could all recognize as being genuinely admirable, her love
yeah.
for her brother.
I'm
Like,
quite pleased with that story, because when John wrote the first Nightland story, I think he had a friendship between two guys.
Yes.
And when he was going to write a second one, he said, well, romantic love has been done and friendship has been done. What else could you do? And I said, what about Antigone? And then he did it. And I was really pleased, because I thought it was really good, his whole take on it. I was really pleased.
Right. And I found the ending of the story is exactly what I'm talking about. It's a beautiful ending, but John manages to really thread the needle in that story because it still feels very much like I'm reading an adaptation of Antigone, right? But at the same time, I also felt like it was Christianized. Like he saw, the heart of the story,
which
and he
is
said,
funny,
but in a Christian universe,
which is funny because of course
love
he
matters.
was an atheist when he wrote it.
Yeah, I know.
But
which
he
makes
had
it really fascinating.
He had a Christian. We live in a Christian, or we at least we did. All of the great works that we read in college, many of them came from the Christian period, and so the things that have influenced our society, our thinking, they're all part of Christendom, and I think that came across, even though John himself had not really found his way into seeing that yet at that time when he wrote it.
There's that, and there's the fact that the Nightlands is a Christian story.
Yeah, that's
at
true
its
too.
core.
That's true too. And even I remember something John wrote back when he was an atheist, but he had a Christian character on stage. He did a really good job. It's not something that ever got published because he never finished it. He did a really good job of showing the scene from a Christian point of view. He also had another character in the same story who was a Buddhist, and he did the same thing for them. So it wasn't, that it was Christian per se. It was that he was good at picking the qualities of the worldview, in this case, the Nightland, and being true to them. And I think you're correct in identifying it as a Christian background, even though it's as you say, it's not theologically Christian. Yep.
Right. It's like, the Great Divorce isn't that theologically accurate either, in my opinion, anyway. And I don't think Lewis was trying to be.
No, in fact, I think, I think about that a lot in writing the books of Unexpected Enlightenment, because I don't think I can write not only could I not write a fantasy and make it 100% theologically in keeping with a Christian sect, the Christian sects are not in keeping with each other. So even if you get one of them, you usually lose another one. So I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I finally decided it's a fantasy. My Christian background is fanciful. The purpose of it is to be an analogy for what heaven and hell and spirit and our fight with against sin and everything else in the world, that you might have. I don't mean my books are that per se. I mean the to have the background and the story fit into such a thing.
Right.
And I just can't. It has to be fantasy. I can't make it so that it's going to please everybody. And
well,
so,
the way that I always looked at it was that fiction is like the Great Divorce. So I wouldn't use the Great Divorce as a book, right, as a way to teach what heaven and hell are going to be like.
Right.
However, I would say that the Great Divorce, in the way it illuminates higher truths.
Right.
Like I always said, I never could understand heaven and hell until I read the Divorce.
I think there's things in it that are very helpful to a person in their own spiritual journey, but it's not it's not a travel log of a factual description of a place you're going to go. I mean, parts of it might be correct, parts of it
and neither is
wrong, but it's more an analogy to help us with our own spiritual struggle than it is any information about what's really out there.
Yep.
Yeah. And like the Antigone story, Cry of the Night Hound. Do I think that my brother or whatever is going to reincarnate one day and I'm going to be rewarded in that sense. No. But the higher truth that he's expressing here, that was like there in the Antigone story, but that John drew out, is that
I think
love
you're right.
matters. And
Yeah.
that even with all of these flaws that Antigone has, there is that golden thread that this is how he describes it in the story, in the center, and that has a cosmic significance even in the center of all of this, and that this this fundamentally changes our actions. Love changes our actions, right? It transforms them. This is a straightforwardly biblical idea, really. Like, if you say God is love, and then you say that, like, our works are good works, God has set those good works up for us, and that we're doing them for God. Like, humans are sinful creatures, but when we do things out, God can reach beyond, and that's what I was seeing. And I'm,
I think you're right.
but
To bring it back to writing,
that's what I'm seeing in that Antigone story.
Occasionally, I make notes on subjects I'd like to write a lesson on for the writing course that I haven't done yet. And one of them I've been thinking about recently is shallow versus deep. And it'd be interesting to have because basically the writing course is like an essay with exercises. And so a lot of the fun of the way that I've presented it is that I've come up with some good exercises to bring out the different qualities of whatever it is that I'm trying to teach. And it's partially because some of them come from me having to have thought out to help one of the writers I was editing. And then once I think it out, I put it together and I try to work it backwards to make an exercise. So I don't have an exercise yet for this one, but I think it would be neat to have an article, a lesson on, basically, I guess you'd call it theme, but on the difference between shallow and deep stories and how to deepen your story if you want to. And they don't have to be deep, but if you want to have a deeper story, how to do it. And I had some really good ideas on it a couple of weeks ago, but I didn't make any notes on them, so they may or may not be gone forever. But eventually, hopefully, I'll think about it and write down some notes and eventually turn it into an article. I'd like some.
Yeah, part of what I was doing with the Orpheus story as well was that I was looking at, and I hope that I was doing what Lewis, I think Lewis had a similar idea with Cupid and Psyche, and this is what always attracted me to the Orpheus myth specifically. There is something, which is not always true in every Greek myth, but there is something extremely understandable about the core of the Orpheus and Eurydice myth, where there's something about the story that really, really makes sense, where, like, intuitively, love that it's so powerful that, the stone heart of the god of the dead, right? Like, that you can overcome death because you're that strong. You're afraid and you're doubtful, and you lack, a lack of faith, maybe.
Isn't there a bit of similarity between Orpheus turning around and Peter walking on the water and then doubting? I mean, it's a thing that I actually find kind of scary, because I often think, you'd like to think I wouldn't doubt, but I often think, well, what if, maybe I would have. I can think of many times when I've done the equivalent of, turning around and maybe I shouldn't have, So there's a kind of scariness to it,
Orpheus and Eurydice has been interpreted many, 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 I'm going to add one more, many times over the years. I think that there's an interpretation as early as Plato, where I remember reading one interpretation of the myth where Orpheus was criticized not for defying for trying to get Eurydice out instead of dying himself to be with her.
Huh.
So
interesting.
That was interesting. I think that was how Plato put it. That was an interesting interpretation.
One of the things I think is really cool about Orpheus is that we still have his poems. I mean, they are historically believed to have been written by him. I realize that maybe we don't know for sure who wrote things, but I remember how astonished I was because I think of him as just a mythical character when I found all these poems that they these odes to gods and stuff that they think were written by Orpheus, and of course he started the entire
the
Orphic mysteries, which were all about trying to not drink from the river Lethes and remember who you were or something like that. I don't know the exact details because they were mysteries, but they had to do with how you're coming back from the dead or something like that. But anyway, it's just kind of neat that there seems to have been a historical character associated with him, even though
now
as a mythical
difficulties, of course, one of the difficulties of it is making sure that you're bringing in your modern assumptions, which is very, very hard. Like, for example, my reader in your novel writing class, James, and he is absolutely right. Like, that's way too modern. You can't use that.
Yeah, we missed you for a second. We lost you for a second there. What did you say?
I used the description depressed at one point in he's like, no, that like change it to even dark humored, which is what melancholic would do, because depressed is way too modern of a term.
Yeah, there is.
Think of things that way. And he's absolutely right.
Yeah, it is definitely something to think about, because you're right that there's certain modern ways we think of things that they just didn't think of things in the past. And the closer we can get to the way they did think, the more the authenticness comes through the story.
This is one of the great is that Gates of Fire, for the most part anyway, feels very, very true to the times. I will say that there are moments where I feel like Pressfield, the author, brings his Christian assumption strongly. Like, it's actually a beautiful section of the story, but there's a running thread in the story where one of the main characters, who, by the way, is the historical figure, person who made the famous "Then we prefer to fight in response to the Persian arrows blocking out the sun."
Yes.
Dianakes is and Dianakes is a main character in Gates of Fire. And there's a running thread throughout the story that Dianakes is trying to figure out what the opposite of fear is. Like, and the main character of the book describes Dianakes as a student of fear. Like, he is constantly trying to understand fear. Now, this is all well and good. This is not what I'm criticizing. However, there is a moment that I have really mixed feelings about, because on one hand, it's a beautiful line and a beautiful scene. And on the other hand, I'm like, but would the ancient Greeks have said this?
Yeah.
He comes to the conclusion in the middle of the Battle of Thermopylae, where he says to them, like, I've come up with the answer. I know what the opposite of fear is. And he goes, what? And he goes, it's love. And that's how the chapter ends. And I went, impossible. I love the line. Like, it's profound, really. But would the Greeks have thought that? Like,
it's
would
hard
the Spartans have said that?
Sometimes I go back and I find that these concepts are a lot older than we thought they were. And I know that there is a theory that even the things that Jesus said came part from the Jews, but part from a certain Greek tradition. So it's possible, but also, as you say, that is quite a Christian view. And I can see how it kind of, you wonder if maybe it should have been worded slightly differently to give it more of what it would have been like at the time.
And I'm of mixed feelings about it too, because like as a line on its own, and even as like an idea, it's a profound line.
Yeah, and it's really good.
It made me stop and think, But at the same time, I was just like in the middle of this very Greek story about about Spartans, right? That was the other thing too that I would these are all very mild criticisms. I would mildly criticize about Gates of Fire is I think that they had too much of an idea of Greece as a unified body. Like, he was talking about, the Greeks would fight against the Persians. And sure, he talked about Sparta and Athens as separate, but there was still, like, this overwhelming sense of Greek pride. And I don't think that would have existed, especially
No,
not with
I think
Sparta and
it was
Athens.
that in Thucydides. I mean, it was the Hellenes. They did pull together, and they were trying to get each other to pull together to fight the Persians. So I'm not.
They were, but the Athenians and the Spartans did not get along.
No, they
There
didn't.
was
Sorry, not Thucydides. It would have been the one where they're fighting the Persians, which I think
Herodotus?
is.
It might have been Herodotus.
I think Herodotus, they're fighting the Persians, and Thucydides. I mean, Herodotus is a history, but I think there's some things about the Persians and that. And Thucydides is more the fight between the Greeks, the Peloponnesian War, which was the Greeks against Greece. But there was there was definitely some sense of when they were trying to get the different city-states to get together, they did have an idea that they had some kind of commonality. But I do think you're right that it's very easy for us to make more of it than they might have. And I know from other histories that I've read, that I've seen of that period, that city-states with common alliances was really common. So to a certain degree, it might have been more that they had alliances and less that they thought they had a common, less that they were Hellenes and more that they had made agreements with each other, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, and to be clear, these are nitpicks. Like, this isn't even really a full critic. Like, Pressfield, even at the beginning, he does make it very clear that the cities are very different from each other. In fact, it's a plot point at the start of the book. He is literally at a crossroads between Athens and Sparta. And his childhood sweetheart, I guess. She's his cousin. But, this is ancient Greece, so he's in love with her. She goes to Athens, and he goes to Sparta.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is a criticism. It is a nitpick at best. More like impressions that, were I the editor, I would have asked him to tighten up, possibly. But it is a great book. The other thing about the book that made me not so much, say, oh, I don't know if that's bad or that's wrong, but make me pause, is that he portrays that the Greeks knew they were going to die. The Spartans especially. Like, they talk about it like they were going to that battle to die. Death was certain. Leonidas in the story even talks about a prophecy that he is going to die in the battle. Everybody there, like, before they leave, they are basically said, like, yeah, we're never going to see any of you again. We're all dead. We're dead men walking. And if we come back, it's to our shame. Right? Like, and I am not completely sure that that's how the Greeks thought. Like, I've read some histories on the Battle of Thermopylae, and they said, believe it or not, although we look at it as, like, an outnumbered force versus this terrifying empire, they're like, and that's true to an extent, but Thermopylae was an incredibly defensible pass.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Persians won the battle was actually, like, a great Persian victory that they did it.
Yeah.
The other thing, too, is that, like, it didn't really accomplish anything. Like, they portray it as, like, oh, we need to buy time for the Greeks. But the time that they bought, Athens probably could have evacuated in time anyway. Like, Thermopylae was an entirely moral victory.
The main kind of virtue of Thermopylae was that it inspired the rest of the Greeks. The sacrifice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and it did. Like, don't get me wrong, it was an inspiring story.
I thought that was.
I'm just wondering if
it was more of a morale victory.
Yeah, like Lepanto in the grand scheme of
like,
things.
I don't think they were convinced they would die.
I think you may be right that they. I don't know if they. I don't know. I'm trying to remember back to freshman year when we actually read about Thermopylae in the ancient Greeks version, and that was like 40 years ago. I remember
watching
for how long it was, but I'm not entirely sure that they necessarily. I mean, this, they went forward with their Spartan qualities, and I think you may be right that they weren't quite as. When you're writing a book, there might be value to having the characters have a certain, we're all going to die, but we're going forward quality. I don't know whether, I don't remember that they. I'm trying to remember
the thing is, not even.
I don't recall, but it's been a while.
I think that they did go knowing that there was a high chance of death.
You knew there was a high chance, but the question is just, did they think it was a suicide mission, or did they think, like any battle, that they're going to do their best and maybe they'd win, maybe they'd lose? That's what I don't remember. I don't remember if there were prophecies in the, like, if you read Eurydice, they had prophecies. A great kingdom will fall.
Oh yeah.
This one per se. Yeah.
I just I think suicide mission and stuff like that is a very modern term for something that they wouldn't like fundamentally understand. They would say something like, "What do you mean suicide? I am going forward, and perhaps Zeus will favor me. Ares will not touch me."
That's exactly what I mean. I mean, I think they went forward, and they might have known the chances of dying were really high, but they would think maybe the gods are on our side. Maybe some good will come of it, and they would just go.
Yeah. Plus, it's like some of the other things like Athens' attack on Syracuse and stuff like that, where it's like very stupid. I don't think the Athenians ever thought of it as a suicide sort of thing.
Yeah, and they made. If you look at the ancients, they made lots of really stupid war decisions. But you also have to take into account they didn't. I mean, we're used to situations where we almost always have a lot more information than they must have had.
Yep.
And so sometimes when you look and you go right now, you go, how in the world could they think that was a good idea? And the answer is that, maybe they really didn't know.
Syracuse was very special. But, it's like, so how do we know how many people are in there? Well, my cousin had a dream and, said that they had 100,000 men, but they're all pathetic slaves, so they'll run the second we put up stiff resistance.
Right, exactly.
Like, I wanted to point out, though, like, whatever Thermopylae was, it was important for all the reasons that, people would. It's like Lepanto. In reality, Lepanto didn't change the power dynamics. But it was a super huge, win against the Ottomans, who had, up until this point, basically been invincible.
Right.
It didn't matter.
It was a morale victory, even if it was, it may not have changed where they went that.
The other thing too is I remember watching somebody was going over the battle. I think it might have been George Carlin of Hardcore History. I don't know for sure this was a while ago. He was going over Thermopylae, and he's like, Herodotus. He goes, keeping in mind that he is like, we have very few sources that give a full account of the battle. Herodotus tells it almost like the movie. Like, he is seriously providing propaganda for the Greeks right now.
Yeah.
And he goes, we can't prove that it's propaganda. I mean, we have no contrary opinion. But, like, they go, look at how good these lines are. Yeah. But we prefer to fight in the shade line is truly one of the great lines in the history of mankind. And, like, so, it's always the Greeks who are getting the cool lines.
But, any culture where there is a tradition of witty lines, I guess I shouldn't be too surprised that they would have them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They respected them, and they're bothering to record them, and it's, I mean, because you have to think about it. If that guy didn't say that line, someone else thought it up. So somebody had to.
Yeah.
And the Spartans
Pressfield claims that. Go ahead, Ben.
The Spartans were famous for their laconic, braggadocio and lines and whatnot. Like, it's not against their character. Like if an Athenian said something clever like that, it's like, what, did a Spartan write this? You know?
Yeah, because
Uh,
the Athenians made these impassioned and or subtle speeches, but
mm,
Spartans made one-liners.
Yeah, there's a Pressfield tells the story of how he decided to write Gates of Fire, and he says he was reading an account of the Battle of Thermopylae, and he got to the line where Dianakes responds to, like the flight of our arrows walk out the sun, and Dianakes responds, "Well, fine, we prefer to fight in the shade." And Pressfield said, "Oh, I know this guy," because Pressfield was in the military. And Gates of Fire is mandatory reading, by the way, for one of the military academies. I don't remember
Wow,
which one, but
that's really cool.
and he says that he read that line by Dianakes, and he said, "Oh, I know this guy. I know exactly the sort of person who would say this. I
Yeah,
totally understand." So there is a realism to it.
yeah, definitely, definitely. Yep.
At the
Anyway,
same time, though, the drama of Thermopylae really does almost write itself. This is why, the movie 300 absolutely fascinates me, because it's like all of the facts of Thermopylae are accurate, but backwards. Correctly. It's almost bizarre, but not I don't even think it's a bad movie, but like it's not it is simultaneously really accurate and really inaccurate. One of the best examples of this is when they kill the messenger for the Persians. This story did happen. They really, a messenger really did come. They really accept that the moral of the story, as by the Greeks, was literally the opposite of how they portray it in 300.
yeah,
The messenger was killed. The Spartans were horrified. They realized they had messed up badly. So they sent 2 Spartans down to the Persians to explain what happened, and then say, also, we're going to leave these 2 men to you as tribute. Do what you see fit to them to make up for our dishonor. And Xerxes' response is that he's so impressed by this, he pardons them and says that he is, and says that he risks the Spartans' honor and sends them back.
yeah.
So Xerxes is
And that
portrayed as an honorable opponent. He is,
kind of sense of honor was quite common. I'm not saying everybody, but there it existed quite. It was a lot of it in the ancient Greek world. It's almost like the thing, like we have Christian virtues. They had honor as the thing that they lived trying to live up to. And if you don't understand that, you might have a good story, but it's not really a Greek.
right. And the portrayal of Xerxes in the 300 movie as this evil king, that isn't exactly how they saw him.
Yeah,
It was more like Xerxes was an honorable opponent.
yeah.
You know,
I mean,
he was like the
tough and
final boss.
frightening because he was coming, but they're all meeting each other on the field of battle with a sense of kind of respect for the prowess of the other guys. But then 300
Right, and that
based on a
included
comic
Xerxes, who
book,
was a great king.
and the comic book was a comic book story about 300. It wasn't, it wasn't supposed to be history. So
No, it wasn't. It is a very entertaining movie. I enjoy it. It's just I've never seen a movie like that where everything that happens in the movie, you can find a parallel for it, in history,
right, but
more or less.
they like twisted it, like turned it around.
Yeah, it's almost bizarre. But I like 300. I mean, it's a fun movie on its own,
Yeah.
And I know that there's a big right-wing contingent to that really loves 300.
it more or
For
less
some reason.
sparked the right wing fitness movement, revived it after it lain sallow through the after Victorian Christian vitalism died out.
Huh. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I
Well,
didn't know.
it's not like anyone's really wrote books about this, But like, if you were to trace like gym memberships, fitness blogs, and stuff like that, I would be shocked if there isn't a huge connection with the release date of the 300 movie. You know,
That's
within
what's
a
cool.
year of release,
That's
so to
cool.
say.
That's cool.
Because it comes like Greek and whatnot, history and study comes up quite a bit in these circles, because you know they're seeking a certain amount of human perfection. Um, you know, at least the non-Christians are. The Christians, of course, are happy to be pursue the limits of what God has made us to be. Mm.
Anyway, as you see, the point of the writing class is to get people like Anthony to write cool stories about things like what we've been discussing.
And he does it with less pain than what I have to do to get a good story out of him.
It's just a fun idea, and it's fun for me because I feel like I get to encourage people, and that's I had a really nice moment on Twitter a few weeks ago where like 3 or 4 different people suddenly went, yeah, my books are out there because of her. And when they were talking about me, and I thought that actually makes me feel really good. Because it wasn't really, I mean, in some cases I knew that I had been the editor or something, but in other cases I had just like helped or something. And so it's a fun thing. And I have this little thing I tell myself. It's not necessarily true. I think the truth is just that I really enjoy helping people. But I tell myself, because I always talk to myself as if I'm more Machiavellian than I really am. I tell myself, we want to sell books, and people who read bad books are less likely to want to go out and read another book. So it's actually in my own best self-interest to improve the quality of the books of other writers. So that's my little, my little self-talk I give myself for why I have all these writing courses and do the editing and stuff. But the truth underneath is I just like, I like writing. I know how I feel. I want to help the other friends and people I know feel like they're, getting the best they can out of what they're doing too. But I also have this idea that if the better we all do, the better we'll do all together. That if people go and they read books they like, they're more likely to go buy another book. If they pick up books and they're not good, they're less likely to want to pick up another book. So that's my little argument for doing all this.
It's a good argument. It's something I agree with fundamentally as well. There's no point in just shoving out, 100 of the same sort of story, because then people will get burnt out on it, and they won't pick up the next guy. Like, it doesn't matter if it's making you money. You're spoiling the pool for everyone else.
It's a hard thing because one of the guys in the writing class had a discussion with me the first time I did it, and he said, "You're not charging enough." And I said, I know absolutely right that I don't charge enough either for the writing classes or for my editing skills, compared with the market of what other like professionals charge. I said, but I know firsthand how much money these books make, even if you do a good job. Right now, for most of us who aren't getting into bookstores and we're not right now. I think someday we're going to hit a point where people are going to be looking for our kind of books, but it's not going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
I know that no matter how much I increase the value of the book, it's not going to make up for me charging a lot of money for it,
Yeah.
So I try to keep my fees as low as I possibly can and still want to do it, And the reason is that I feel that what I'm doing is a value, and I really think it should value. In an ideal world, I'd charge a lot more. But if I'm helping you with a book and I improve your book a lot by my help, but you still are only going to make $100 or $1,000 on it or something, it's pointless for me to raise my prices. So I try to keep them pretty low.
Yeah.
Because that's why I say that really what I'm just trying to do is help, even though I tell myself I have these other motivations. Because,
Machiavellian.
I just look at the different friends and their work and the people I'm trying to help. And I'm like, it would be ridiculous for me to charge more than this book is ever going to make in the current market,
Mm.
But I do want people to have, to do the best they can. But I keep working and praying towards the idea that sooner or later, I think we're going to break out of, I always think of us all as being like in a well, like we're shouting and only the people near the well can hear. And each little group is in their own well. And someday I think we're going to break out of the well and we're going to find, either one thing is going to happen, like, let's say, a famous conservative talk show guy is going to suddenly start doing sci-fi fantasy conservative writers, or a lot of things are going to be in synergistic, like, just enough of us are reaching out of our own wells that we make a little network, and we suddenly start reaching a much larger audience.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think it may take a while. It may take until you get a lot of people homeschooling, and then they grow up and they're homeschooling, and you really have enough of a group who are not kind of in the modern way of thinking that they're really looking for books that are a little more decent or a little more Christianized or whatever it is you want to call them. I think a lot of these things are in the hands of God. He knows what he's doing, and we don't really know what he has in mind. But I like to think that sooner or later we're going to break out. And I'd love to see us break out as a group.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not to say that there aren't, some people wouldn't do better than others or something, but I just love the idea that we could come out in such a way that it's kind of like when people suddenly discover Bollywood movies or anime or manga or Chinese TV or Korean TV. And all of a sudden, for a while, they have a huge glut of really high quality stuff because the best of the best is available, and it's been around for 20 years or for 30, 50 years or something. You know what I mean? And
Yep.
if you've never seen it before, suddenly there's all these great works that you can interact with. And so we have all these things going, and I'm just hoping sooner or later that we'll reach a point where we'll reach a larger audience who might really enjoy this stuff, but they just don't know it's here.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree with you. I think eventually, some critical mass or something will be hit, and things will change for the better. Because it's their blacklists do exist. All these things that sort of keep us down to exist. I'm not calling anyone out, but most authors that I've known through the Superversive or otherwise have not been good marketers. There's.
Well, I'll tell you. So I was just talking to someone about this. So when I started writing, before the modern period, the only thing you could do to be a more successful writer was write better books. I'm saying once you got your publisher, you have a publisher. Yes. Advertising didn't sell books. Nothing sold books except for word of mouth back then. You were in a bookstore and word of mouth was based entirely on quality of story. The top guys might go on tour and talk to people, but anybody below the top level, that wasn't really going to sell more than a few books doing something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we live in a situation now that's about as bad for writers you can imagine, because that situation was about as good as you can imagine. You just had to be a good writer. Most writers are not good marketers. Yep. And marketing is a whole different skill. And I'm lucky as a mom who also does editing for money. I'm lucky when I get to write anything, much less also take the time to market it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I'm really hoping that in addition to breaking out, that there will be some kind of a change where these things will start to separate again. And there'll be some other mechanism that will be good for reaching readers other than each individual author personally having to also be a good marketer.
Yep.
I mean, if nothing else, you think there would be a job equivalent to agent would develop, where the people who are good marketers would would be able to help the others. Unfortunately, what we saw in, for instance, Silver Empire, they did their darndest to help other people, and they found very much to their dismay, because it really made them sad. They were not that bad at selling their own books, but they couldn't really seem to sell other people's books.
Yep.
You know, so I don't know what the answer will be to this in the long run, but we went from an ideal writer's position to a very awkward writer's position. And I'm hoping that we will find, at least eventually, in 30 years, if not 5 years, that we're not in a situation where it's the best marketers who are getting to read rather than the best writers who are getting to read.
Yep. But the thing is that, like, with the marketing, like, I sold your books just fine. I sold other people's books just fine. And sure, it was person to person in Dragon Con, but that's no different than word of mouth. I know that there's something somewhere that'll fix everything for that. I just don't know what. Because, like, I listen to guys who are so weird that if they released a podcast about the bodybuilding practices of Atlantis, I wouldn't blink.
Yeah.
They go from this is a mushroom fungicide which will help you increase your gains, and we must do this to destroy the liberals, and don't you know that the Europeans are the sword of Saint Michael? And I'm like, yes, this is the schizophrenia I want. But it's like, these guys are making a great deal of money, and it's very highbrow, very educated. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm sort of exaggerating what it sounds like, but these are very developed ideas that are spreading, and they're hitting the zeitgeist in just the right way that they can support themselves on it.
Right, and I keep thinking that's going to happen sooner or later to people in our whole field.
Yep.
Not necessarily us, obviously, we hope us, but that there's going to be something where we're going to, because when you look at the guys who were like Tolkien or Lewis or Rowling or all these, usually at some point they just hit a wave, so to speak. All of a sudden people began discovering it. One thing that I keep thinking about, and I have no idea how to do this, it's really completely out of our ability at the moment, but I keep coming back to it, is, I think it was Zane Grey. It was either Louis L'Amour or Zane Grey. I think it was Zane Grey. One of the really big names in Westerns, who lasted way after other Western writers had kind of faded. Became successful because he was friends with truck drivers. And he just bought his own books and handed them to the truck drivers who delivered to grocery stores, and the grocery store truck driver guys put the books on the shelves in grocery stores. And people saw the guy, they saw his name, they started buying him, and he became a big hit. And I keep thinking, I really think bookstores are more important than we've been pretending they are.
Yeah.
I know, like, if I hear of a book I want, and I have to remember to go online to look for it, the chance of me ever interacting with it is a lot lower than if I happen to see it at the bookstore. And I can tell you that the first Prospero book did pretty well, and then the second and third really didn't, because the covers, my editor thinks it's because the covers of the second one was just awful. And the cover of the first one was not correct for the book. It was a great cover, but if you bought it, it wasn't going to give you the book you wanted. The new cover that's out there now fits the book. The old one didn't really fit the book. But the book that made it, of those books, the one that made it to the bookstore, sold 5 times as much as the others. So I know that just being in a bookstore where someone could browse and pick it up gives a book a big plus. And I've been saying for years, I wish that the indie book writers and the independent bookstores, particularly independent sci-fi fantasy bookstores, of which there are some in the country, could somehow make some kind of a deal where we could actually get physical books in front of people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be a big breakthrough. But the problem is that anything involving physical books requires money being put out, and it's something that a lot of us just don't have. I'm lucky if I can afford a cover,
Yep.
you know. But I just feel like there's
Uh,
some kind of marketing to books, to small bookstores, is like an area that's could be really valuable, and we haven't figured out how to take advantage of it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I found like what you were saying about it being a very difficult time for authors pretty interesting because I'm not so sure if I disagree with you, but I've said kind of the opposite, but I think we might be talking at cross purposes. So what I have said was, if you had asked me like 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, when I was a kid and I was researching like being an author, if somebody came up to me and said, "Can I get a career as an author?" I would have told them, honestly, it's almost entirely luck based if you do or don't. Like, there are minimum, like, to create a career out of it. I would have said, I mean, be an author, but don't expect to quit your day job. But if somebody asked me now, could I make a career as an author? I would tell them, I think so. I think it's possible. But in order to do that, you need to do two things really well. But they are two things that you could actually do, if that makes sense. Like, one is produce a lot, like way more than most authors produce. So something like, I think the minimum would be like 4 books a year. And even that is probably low. It's probably closer to like 6 books a year. Yeah. And number 2 is you need to know how to market.
Yeah.
Now, both of
I
these
think
are things that you can do.
right. I
And
think
if you
we're saying
want to
the same
say,
difference. I was saying that a lot of writers are introverts who are not good at dealing with people. And the situation for once you got a publisher, if you were a writer, what you needed to do to get better at being a writer was 100% good for those people, because sitting at home and writing and trying to get it be a better writer was the thing that would work.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, you have to also be able to be a person who's willing to interact with other people. You have to be willing to go and sell your own stuff, which for many introverts is about as painful a thing as you could ask them to do. So I wasn't talking about the fact that you could or couldn't. I wasn't talking about the potential. I was talking about how easy it was for the average person who is a writer to be able to do it. Because I mean,
yeah,
I've been at this a long time. I got interested in it. I studied how to do it. I worked out how to do it. I got John and I both into a major publisher when, like, most of the people we were friends with at the time never did get in, because we just kept working at it. I went and met the right people. I worked for publishers, and I've tried to follow all the advice that's been given to me by my publishers, both Tor and Wordfire, about what you need to do to sell books. And I'm just not very good at it. And I don't think I'm particularly bad at it. I'm just, it takes time. And time is something I don't have if I want to write. So I have to say market or writing. Well, 10 years ago, that was not an issue. You didn't need to do more than a little bit of marketing, going to a convention once in a while. All you needed to do was write. So it's not that you don't have great potential. Certainly, it's much, much easier to get published now than it used to be. Certainly, there's great potential for being a writer. There's, as you say, if you can do the rapid fire release thing, that is said to work quite well. But as far as if you are a normal, somewhat introverted writer who wants to spend time writing, it's a lot harder. So if you say, there's different aspects of it. The aspect of getting published, a lot easier. The aspect of wanting to just write, a lot harder. The aspect of the fact that there are things you can do and then you'll do well. I'll tell you one thing that you can do that I don't do, and I can't, but a lot of writers can, and it is follow the current fads. In the old days, you couldn't follow a fad because your book would come out 2 years later. But now you can. So the people who are writing lit RPG, for instance, are making money hand over fist. I know a guy who made $250,000 last year because his lit RPG books in audio form are listened to by truck drivers. And he, advises people on how to make a living as a writer. And the number one thing he does, he runs a publishing company. The number one thing he does is tell them what genres to write in. So if you're willing to switch genres, if you're willing to do certain things like that, and the reason for that, it's not just that that's what's popular. That's what the Amazon search engines are bringing up as popular. So if you're in a bookstore, a guy walks in and maybe he likes reading this, but your book is right next to his. He can look at it. But on Amazon, if he doesn't think to look for the subject that you put in your searches, your book is as if it isn't there. So being part of a genre that people are searching for gives you an enormous jump. So it's not that you can't be a writer and really enjoy it, and if you're good at marketing, do really well. It's that marketing is difficult. I've been trying it for about 10 or 15 years now, and I just don't get anywhere with it,
Yep. And just because I'm good at, selling in person.
Is absolutely correct.
Well, I mean, if we could get a play, if it was a little easier to get a pile of books and go to conventions, and we could do it, if we could have the money to have 100 books each, and we met 4 times a year at different conventions and sold them in person, we might be doing much better with this whole thing. But right now, I'm just not in a position to do that.
Yep.
You did a great job, though. I remember that whole event with great joy every time I think about it.
Hopefully, some things will come up in the future.
I just think we'll find something. And when I look at the lives of writers in the past and how they broke out, it's often it's not really a predictable thing. But, it's almost always something unexpected happens that you wouldn't have thought of if you were trying to plot it out,
Mm-hmm.
The only kind of plotting type thing that I have in mind is that, I'm working on book 6 of my current series, and it's the end of the freshman year's arc. So I'm just trying to get it out as soon as I can. But I think because it's taking me so long now, hopefully in the future will not take me near as long. The mixture of the lockdown and homeschooling really, took a knock out of how quickly I was producing work. But I'm looking at Rachel's sophomore year, and I'm thinking I may just write all 6 books of her sophomore year and put them out rapid fire in 1 year. Even if it takes me, let's say, 5 years to have the next book come out, because then I could do the rapid fire thing, because I lose so much by the fact that, you put a book out on Amazon, people get excited about it. You wait 2 years, you put out another one. There's no real way to get the people who read the first 4 who really want to read book 5 to know it's there. Once in a while, like on Kobo, I had a whole bunch of people read book 1, and a certain number, very small, but because most of them were like foreigners who were living in like some crazy, India or African place, and they only want a free book because it's free. But there were a small number of people who bought them and read all 4, and when 5 came out, half of them bought 5, and I think the other half never found out it existed. So the big advantage with the rapid fire is when they read it and they go back, and then there's the next one, or it's already coming, or it's already on pre-order or something like that. So it gets around some of the problems of the modern. So I'm thinking of trying that. That's about as close as I can get to some kind of a marketing thing. But I just look around and I see, there's a few of us who I think are good at marketing. But there's a lot who are not. They have, they're whatever reason, they have jobs, they have families, whatever it is. They don't have a lot of time they can put into this.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish there was some way to help them all,
Mm.
Just today I had up on Wright of Center authors some questions about doing an award, which I've been talking about for a long time. I mean, I've been talking about doing a Superversive award since before the awards were a problem, just to have a Superversive award, not because we were annoyed at other awards. And the discussion led me to decide I'm not going to worry about an award for now. That's kind of too complicated for me right now. But I am going to try to start doing every year the recommended reading list that I did, I think, like 2 years ago for around the time of the Dragon Awards. Because what we really need is a place where, if you like this guy's book, you might also like this other guy in our extended group's book. And I thought, well, if Superversive SF put out a recommended reading list based on, recommendations from readers and people in the various groups we're in every year, I remember 20 years ago, there were things like that. And John and I would look eagerly when his books first came out to see if he'd made the list,
Mm-hmm.
And I just think something like that might be helpful. So that's my one little contribution myself, is that I'm gonna it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to be the person curating the list. I've done it once or twice before, and you just notice how many times and put the books in order of how many votes they got, and you have a little list. But I think I'm going to try to do that once a year. It's not too much effort. I really like the idea of a Superversive award, but I just don't have the reading time to commit to work on something like that. And there's enough other awards going on that when I said, hey, I've been thinking about it, what kind of categories, 2 or 3 other people went, wait, we're already doing awards. And I thought, well, I don't want to step on the toes of people who are actively working on these things. So I don't think I'll worry about that right now. But I think the reading list could be useful, because some of those we don't, I mean, even within our own group, we don't know the other person's put a book out.
Yep. It's, yeah. Like, I've lost track how many times Scott Huggins' novel has been put out. I've lost track of, people like Mona Lisa Foster and whatnot. I'm not even sure what's going on with it. But not that I particularly enjoy their books, but to plug them, and I don't mean that like they're bad authors. Excuse me, that was a bit off the cuff. I mean, in the sense of
your genre, but you would like to plug them just because you respect what they do.
That's exactly it. Like, it's not about whether or not oh boy, it's about me. It's like, okay, my friend is my ally, and my ally, whatever, has released a novel. I must plug it.
I used to put books up on Superversive SF, and in the last 9 months, I've only done that a few times,
Yeah.
And it's just because of my own things that I have going on. But I'd like to do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just telling my sons that I have a series of articles I want to write, and right now I have like 6 different projects. I'm literally 6 doing projects I'm doing, including my mom's estate and my novel and a bunch of other things. The writing class, the 2 anthologies I'm supposed to be editing. But when that's done and I get to editing StarQuest, which I'm hoping to do this fall, I was thinking, rather than starting on my next book while I'm doing StarQuest, I might try to do some of these essays. And when I do that, hopefully I can get putting stuff back up on Superversive SF again. One of the series of essays I want to do is something that I really want to do, but I think there's one guy who might like them. I know a guy I think might enjoy them, but he's like the only one. And that is, I really want to take all the writing class principles and write articles about them using One Piece, the anime, as my example. because I think that author does a lot of these things that I think are good, the writing techniques really well, like characterization or not forgetting things, or I mean, he just does so many things so well. But the articles would have to be written as if you'd seen the show, and it's over 1,000 episodes. So it's not a really useful way to do writing articles. Most of my audience will not have any idea what I'm talking about. But I think it would be really interesting to do for myself, because I'm interested in how this author does these things, and I'd like to write them down, you know? So in the early version of One Piece, it used to say, there used to be a line where the Pirate King said, I left all my worldly goods, or all my treasure, in one piece. And I thought I could do all my writing advice in one piece as my little tagline for the whole thing. But I may do those articles. I want to finish I did 4 of the 5 Defending the Wood Perilous articles, and the 5th one, which is supposed to be identifying why fairy tales are under attack in the modern world, I thought up at 4 years ago, and I haven't written it yet. So I do want to do some article writing, and I'm hoping this fall that I'll get to some of them before I start on book 7. So it's, and then who knows? I'd like to do a second writing book at some point in the future someday, because I have 5 articles, 5 lessons just on writing romance, and there are other things that I mentioned that
I would appreciate that.
They're fun. I did a whole romance class, and if you want them, I'll send them to you. It's just 5. 5 chapters. It's not very long, but
I would appreciate it. Yes.
Different aspects of writing romance is from the point of view. It's funny. I spent half an hour describing this to 2 kids my sons are friends with today, explaining the difference between, like, I had to explain to them that when I'm telling you about what's necessary to write a good romance, you must put aside real life. It has nothing to do with what makes a good relationship. Like in real life, 2 people might meet and they might be destined for each other, and they're nothing like what would make a good romance. But if I tell you romance needs a feminine quality and a masculine quality, and they need to be in contrast, it's true. The qualities need to be a certain way to make the feeling that comes with romance. And it's totally unrelated to what a real couples might be like. So I had to get that down, and then I was able to tell them some of the principles. And after a while, they were like, we were just discussing Airbender and Legend of Korra and how the characters did or didn't work in that. After a while, they were like, yeah, I see what you mean. It's kind of a enjoyable conversation. But so I have that, and I think I should write one more at some point to go with it on male romances. Masculine romances, because a feminine romance is a romance where a girl needs to use her personality and character and her intelligence and ingenuity to figure out what needs to be done to win a boy. A masculine romance is a boy has his beloved stolen or taken from him or held back by her father, and he has to go out and prove himself with great adventure in order to prove himself worthy, and she's not really ever part of the story. like Princess of Mars, And it's a very different type of story. I'm not saying you couldn't write a masculine one where the girl was a character, but there's a difference between romance of the kind that produces the feminine romantic emotion that girls get from reading romances, or anybody, and the masculine, old-fashioned adventure-style romance, but it's still a romance in the sense of it's a guy getting a girl, but a guy gets a girl by being brave and showing his virtues and his courage and his brawn, or whatever it is he's using, either his cleverness or his strength, and a girl gets a guy by running in front of him until he thinks he's chasing her. But a girl gets a guy by having to figure out how he thinks and present herself in such a way that not that the girl is always the pursuer, but it's much more of a like a puzzle. Female romances are more like a puzzle, and masculine ones are more like an adventure. So I need to write one more article to go with the other ones that I have and write about the adventure side of it.
Yeah.
I haven't got to that yet.
Yep. That's
But romance is really useful as glue. So if stories need two threads, romance is a great second thread because you can have just a little bit of it like a spice, but it'll keep readers going. A lot of long series, what makes you go pick up the next book is that you want to find out if the two characters get together, even if there's very little romance in the actual book. Even if it's mainly drama or mainly urban fantasy or mainly action, it's good to know how to do it because you use it as that little bit of kind of, it's the thing that stretches between the books,
absolutely. That's absolutely wonderful. I dig it. Romance, unfortunately, is not my strong suit. But then again, it's.
I
We'll
mean,
go.
I don't really use it. I love One Piece, probably maybe my favorite work of any kind, at least outside of books.
Yep.
And there's no romance in it almost at all,
But it is a romance. It's a boy's romance of adventure and being a pirate.
In fact, Romance Dawn is the name of the first section. But I mean, there's it's not like you're shipping. The fans ship for characters, but the author isn't setting them up and trying to show who's going to get together and stuff like that.
Yep.
But anyway, my point is, there's many types of stories. You don't need romance in all stories, but if you're going to do it, it's useful to know how to do it.
Apparently, One Piece's secondary market is older women. I still haven't figured it out, but I think there's something to it.
It's a good story. It's well told,
Unfortunately, I must call it quits. Anthony.
Yes.
What's up?
I think
we had a chat from 804. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, anyway, we had a chat from 804 that was asked a question that we did not address.
We're not going to address it. He's stuck. He's stuck. Is what it is. He would have to buy the course.
What was the question?
Advice on how to plot. Yeah, that's what he was asking for.
I do have a plotting lesson. If he leaves, some information, if he leaves a comment on the link, I'll respond with how to contact me, and I can talk to him about it. Right now, I'm kind of just sharing these things with people. I eventually want to sell them, but I really want them to be useful. So I'd be happy to share the plotting class with him. If he leaves a comment, I will tell him how to contact me, and then so I could share it with him.
So Eldritch fan, please leave a comment with some contact information. We will get in touch with you.
On the link after the description.
On the link.
Yeah, just leave a comment, and I will go give him contact information. So I have a email.
There you go.
Or online contact. So I will go by and give it to him there.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you have any final words for us, Jagi?
It was great talking to you guys, and I realized we spent a lot of time talking about Anthony's story in ancient Greece, but that was a cool subject too, so I'm perfectly happy with that. If at some point I work out something I can do with this writing course where I can make it available to people, I will let them know. In the meantime, I have the book. I took it down from Amazon because we're trying to shop it around, but I'm perfectly willing to just give it to anybody who would like to read it, so just let me know. Eventually I'm going to be selling it again, but right now I'm willing to just share it. I've shared it with a couple of homeschooling people. I'm even willing to just share the videos at this point, as long as somebody will use them privately and not share them beyond that. So just leave a comment if you're interested in seeing any of this information, and hopefully someday it will be more publicly available to purchase. And I will I'll let you guys know, and you can make a comment to your listeners when the time comes.
We absolutely will. Be sure to check out Control Episode 1, Satiricide, by Mario Marchetta. A fantastic episode delving into the origins of Control, the mysterious head figure of the paranormal Pinkertons. I want to thank you for listening, and have a good week.